John Wayne Gacy's story begins in the heart of the American Midwest, a place that prided itself on stability, family, and community. But beneath the surface of normalcy and cheerfulness lay one of the most disturbing double lives in American criminal history. Born on March the 17th, 1942, in Chicago, Illinois, John Wayne Gacy was the second of three children in a working-class family of Polish and Danish descent. His father, John Stanley Gacy, was an auto repair machinist, an alcoholic with a violent temper and an obsession with discipline. His mother, Marion Elaine, was warm and protective, often caught between her husband's rage and her children's fear. Gacy's childhood was defined by contradiction, moments of tenderness quickly swallowed by humiliation and violence. From an early age, Gacy struggled to live up to his father's impossible expectations. John Stanley saw his only son as weak, too emotional, too soft, too different. He berated him for everything: his weight, his sensitivity, his inability to defend himself from neighborhood bullies. He mocked him relentlessly, often calling him names that questioned his masculinity. For young John, every act of kindness from his mother only deepened his father's hatred. Those early years planted the seeds of a desperate need for approval that would haunt him for the rest of his life. Despite the tension at home, Gacy sought validation wherever he could find it. Teachers described him as polite, helpful, and eager to please, though socially awkward. He struggled academically and physically, suffering from blackouts and a heart condition that limited his ability to participate in sports. Isolated from his peers and desperate to be accepted, Gacy learned an early and dangerous lesson. That charm could be used as both shield and weapon. At 18, Gacy briefly attended business school before heading west to Las Vegas, where he took a job at a mortuary. He lived in a small apartment above the funeral home, and it was there that he first encountered death in an intimate, unsettling way. Later, he would admit that he occasionally entered the embalming room at night, drawn by the stillness of the bodies. He claimed to have once climbed into a coffin and held a deceased young man, an image that would resurface decades later as investigators tried to understand his fascination with control and mortality. Disturbed by the experience, Gacy returned to Chicago, determined to reinvent himself. He enrolled at Northwestern Business College, where he earned a degree in business management. By his mid-20s, Gacy had cultivated the persona that would define his adult life: outgoing, reliable, and endlessly ambitious. He volunteered, networked, and climbed the social ladder with a calculated charm. In 1964, Gacy married Marlyn Myers, the daughter of a wealthy businessman who owned several KFC franchises in Waterloo, Iowa. Through her family's connections, Gacy was given the opportunity to manage 3 restaurants. The young couple moved into a large home, and Gacy quickly established himself as a community leader. He joined the local JCs, a civic organization for young professionals, and threw himself into volunteer work, charity drives, and social events. But behind the smile, his darker impulses were already surfacing. Fellow JCs recalled that Gacy was friendly but often discussed pornography and sex in inappropriate detail. Some members suspected that his interest in helping troubled young men was more than mentorship. The rumors became reality in 1968, when Gacy was charged with sexually assaulting a 15-year-old boy named Donald Voorhees, the son of a fellow JC. According to court documents, Gacy lured the boy to his home under the pretense of showing him a pornographic film. Once there, he assaulted him. Other boys later came forward with similar accusations, revealing a pattern of manipulation. Gacy offered them money, alcohol, or jobs in exchange for submission. When arrested, he denied everything, claiming he was the victim of a smear campaign. But the evidence was undeniable. In December 1968, John Wayne Gacy was convicted of sodomy and sentenced to 10 years in prison. His wife divorced him, his children were taken away, and his father, whose approval he had sought all his life, died while Gacy was behind bars. When he received the news, Gacy reportedly collapsed in his cell, crying uncontrollably. Guards described him as inconsolable, not because of guilt, but because he would never have the chance to prove his father wrong, to show him that he could still be somebody. Even in prison, Gacy's manipulative charisma flourished. He became a model inmate, working in the kitchen, organizing events, and earning the respect of staff and fellow prisoners. He even secured early release after serving just 18 months of his 10-year sentence. In June 1970, he walked out of prison smiling, ready to rebuild his life. Back in Chicago, Gacy moved in with his mother and began working as a contractor. Using the last of his savings, he started PDM, painting, decorating, and maintenance, a small business that offered home renovation services. He was industrious, ambitious, and once again remarkably successful. Clients loved his attention to detail and friendly demeanor. Neighbors saw him as generous and hardworking. He even became involved in local politics, volunteering for the Democratic Party. In 1971, Gacy met and married Carol Hoff, a divorced mother of two. To the outside world, he seemed redeemed, settled, sociable, and family-oriented. He threw elaborate neighborhood parties, often attended by local politicians and police officers. He built trust in every circle he entered. No one suspected that by then, Gacy's double life had already begun again. At night, while his wife and stepdaughters slept, Gacy prowled the city streets in his car, seeking out vulnerable young men, runaways, hitchhikers, or those desperate for work. He invited them to his home with promises of cash or employment through PDM. Many never left. In the midst of this growing darkness, Gacy cultivated yet another mask, that of Pogo the Clown. He joined a local Jolly Joker clown club and began performing at children's hospitals, charity events, and parades. The makeup, he claimed, allowed him to escape himself, to become someone others adored. To the public, Pogo was harmless fun. To Gacy, it was the perfect disguise, a symbol of how easily he could control perception. By 1975, his marriage was collapsing. Carol complained of strange smells coming from the crawl space and of Gacy's unpredictable moods. She grew tired of his constant absences and the young men who frequented their home at odd hours. When she finally filed for divorce in 1976, Gacy was left alone, completely unrestrained. That same year, disappearances of young men in the Chicago area began to increase. Most were last seen near bus stations or working-class neighborhoods. There were boys on the margins, some estranged from family, others seeking jobs or shelter. Few realized that they were being hunted by a man who lived just like everyone else. To his neighbors, Gacy remained the same affable contractor who organized parties and lent tools. He entertained guests with jokes and barbecues, often while the remains of his victims lay buried just beneath their feet. The smell of decay grew stronger, but Gacy dismissed it as a plumbing issue. When workers complained about the odor, he claimed it was sewage backup. By 1977, Gacy's killings had become compulsive. He developed rituals, luring victims with alcohol or offers of work, then showing them a magic trick involving handcuffs. Once restrained, he overpowered them, often strangling them with a rope tightened by a wooden handle. He referred to this as the rope trick for Gacy. It was not just murder, it was control, complete domination of another life. He buried many of his victims in the crawl space, layering the floor with lime and soil to mask the smell. When he ran out of room, he began disposing of bodies in the nearby Des Plaines River. Yet despite the frequency of disappearances, law enforcement never connected them to one man. Gacy's image, his smile, his respectability, protected him from suspicion. In 1978, that protection began to unravel. 15-year-old Robert Piest, a high school sophomore with plans to attend college, vanished on December 11th after telling his mother he was going to speak with a contractor about a job. That contractor's name was John Wayne Gacy. When Robert failed to return, his mother reported him missing immediately. Detectives from the Des Plaines Police Department, led by Joseph Kozenchak, began investigating. They quickly learned that Gacy had indeed visited the pharmacy where Robert worked that night. When they questioned him, he claimed he never met the boy. But Gacy's evasive answers and smug confidence left investigators uneasy. They decided to dig deeper. What they would uncover over the next 10 days would not only expose the horrifying truth beneath Gacy's house, but would shatter the illusion of safety that suburban America had built around itself. The disappearance of Robert Piest marked the beginning of the end for John Wayne Gacy. For years, his charm and reputation had shielded him from suspicion. But on the night of December 11th, 1978, that carefully constructed mask began to crack. Robert's mother waited in the parking lot of the pharmacy where her son worked. He had told her he'd be right back after talking to a contractor about a potential job. He never returned. The moment his mother reported him missing, the illusion Gacy had built around himself began to crumble. Detective Joseph Kozenchak of the Des Plaines Police Department took the lead on the case. He began with routine questioning, but Gacy's name kept surfacing. Witnesses confirmed that Gacy had been at the pharmacy that night. He admitted to being there, but claimed he'd never spoken to the boy. Kozenchak, however, had a feeling, an instinct, that something about Gacy didn't add up. When a background check revealed Gacy's prior conviction for sexual assault in Iowa, alarms went off. Here was a man who was well known in the community, who volunteered for charity, who dressed as a clown to entertain sick children, and had a dark past involving minors. Kozenchak ordered surveillance on Gacy's home and movements. At first, Gacy seemed unfazed. He noticed the unmarked cars following him and even tried to befriend the officers. He brought them coffee, joked with them, and once even invited them into a restaurant for breakfast. He believed his charm could diffuse any suspicion. But beneath the surface, his composure was cracking. On December 13th, police obtained a search warrant for Gacy's house. They were looking for any sign of Robert Piest. They didn't find the boy, but they did find several disturbing items. A class ring engraved with initials that weren't Gacy's, handcuffs, driver's licenses from multiple young men, and a smell of decay coming from the floor vents. Forensic specialists couldn't yet prove anything, but Kozenchak's gut told him this was more than a missing persons case. Over the next week, Gacy's behavior became erratic. He alternated between confidence and panic. He called friends at odd hours, rambling about his failing business, his exhaustion, his loneliness. He was drinking heavily, sleeping little, and losing control. The surveillance team documented his movements around the clock. Trips to gas stations, bars, and even the Des Plaines River, where he was seen discarding small packages. On December 20th, a lab result came back that changed everything. A receipt found in Gacy's trash matched one belonging to Robert Peast. It was the link investigators needed. The next day, they obtained a second search warrant, this time with the authority to dig. When police entered the house again, they immediately focused on the crawl space. The smell of decomposition was unmistakable. Officers began to dig, and within minutes, a single human bone was uncovered. It was enough. Gacy was arrested that same night. During interrogation, Gacy's calm facade finally broke. Over the next few days, he confessed in chilling, matter-of-fact detail to the murders of more than 30 young men and boys. He described how he had lured them to his home, how he handcuffed and strangled them, and where he had buried their bodies. He claimed it had been a compulsion, something beyond his control, but his tone lacked remorse. He spoke as if describing someone else's life, an observer recounting events, rather than a man admitting to horror. When asked how many he killed, Gacy paused and said quietly, "About 30. Maybe more. Investigators later confirmed 33 victims. As police began excavating the crawl space, the scale of Gacy's crimes became clear. The stench of death filled the neighborhood. Officers unearthed bodies in layers, some stacked together, their remains sealed in lime and plastic. The crawl space became a maze of horror. News cameras surrounded the house, capturing every moment as evidence bags emerged one after another. The nation watched in disbelief. By Christmas 1978, Gacy's house was a full-scale excavation site. Forensic teams worked day and night. As the number of recovered bodies climbed, the case took on a nightmarish scope. Each victim's story painted the same pattern: young, vulnerable, trusting. Many had last been seen alive in Gacy's presence. Some were employees of his contracting company. Others were runaways who had simply vanished from the streets of Chicago. Neighbors were stunned. They recalled Gacy as friendly, helpful, even generous. He had hosted neighborhood parties and attended political functions. One photo of him smiling beside First Lady Rosalind Carter surfaced in the media, shocking the public. How could such evil exist behind that grin? The remains of 29 victims were found beneath his home and garage. 4 others were recovered from the nearby Des Plaines River. Several bodies were so decomposed they could not be immediately identified, leaving families across the Midwest in agony for years. Psychological experts descended on the case. Gacy became the subject of intense study, a textbook example of psychopathy. He exhibited every hallmark: superficial charm, lack of empathy, manipulativeness, and an almost total absence of remorse. He compartmentalized his life to a degree that defied comprehension. A model citizen by day, a predator by night. In February 1980, his trial began. It was one of the most sensational court cases in American history. The prosecution presented hundreds of pieces of evidence: photographs, personal items, human remains, and the detailed confessions Gacy had made to investigators. Witnesses testified about his sexual advances, his use of handcuffs, and his twisted rope trick. The defense pleaded insanity, arguing that Gacy suffered from multiple personality disorder. They claimed that Jack, his darker alter ego, was responsible for the killings. The prosecution countered that Gacy was entirely aware of his actions. He had planned his crimes, concealed evidence, and carried on a normal life. This was not madness. It was method. During the trial, survivors and family members of victims testified with heartbreaking clarity. One young man described narrowly escaping Gacy's house after being handcuffed and attacked. Another recounted how Gacy had once offered him money to perform sexual acts. Each story painted a portrait of a man who thrived on power, the ability to dominate, humiliate, and destroy. After 5 weeks of testimony, the jury deliberated for just 2 hours. They found John Wayne Gacy guilty of 33 counts of murder. He was sentenced to death. Even behind bars, Gacy never stopped performing. He granted interviews, sold paintings, and maintained his innocence in some accounts while confessing in others. He became a macabre celebrity, an object of both horror and fascination. His self-portraits as Pogo the Clown fetched thousands of dollars from collectors, feeding into the morbid allure that surrounded him. Psychiatrists continued to study him, labeling him a classic sociopath, intelligent, manipulative, incapable of guilt. When asked to describe himself, Gacy said, "I'm the last guy you'd expect." And that was true. He weaponized normalcy, turning it into camouflage. Over the next 14 years, Gacy filed countless appeals, claiming procedural errors, ineffective counsel, and even conspiracy. None succeeded. As his execution date neared, he gave a series of interviews that revealed his refusal to confront his own actions. He mocked journalists, downplayed his crimes, and continued to blame others. On May 10, 1994, at Stateville Correctional Center, Gacy's time ran out. His execution by lethal injection drew national attention. Crowds gathered outside the prison, some carrying signs celebrating justice, others silently mourning the victims. When asked for final words, Gacy sneered and said, "Kiss my ass." Moments later, he was dead. In death, Gacy remained an object of morbid curiosity. His brain was preserved for study in hopes of uncovering a biological explanation for his lack of empathy. None was found. What he left behind was not scientific insight, but a chilling truth. There was no single cause, no trauma alone that made him what he was. Gacy had chosen his path, step by step, mask by mask. The house where his crimes were committed was demolished in 1979. The lot left empty for years. Yet even after the ground was cleared, neighbors swore they could still smell decay when the wind shifted. It became a symbol, not just of horror, but of denial. The reminder that monsters don't live in haunted houses. They live next door. Decades later, the legacy of John Wayne Gacy continues to haunt American consciousness. His case reshaped criminal profiling, forensic investigation, and the way society understands hidden violence. He was proof that evil doesn't always hide in darkness. It wears a smile, shakes your hand, and waves from a parade float. His victims were finally given names, faces, and stories, no longer shadows buried beneath his home. Their lives, once erased, became the foundation of every lesson learned from his crimes. Each one reminds us that beneath the masks people wear, truth always finds a way to surface. If this story left you thinking, remember to like, subscribe, And join us next time as we explore more true stories from the shadows, told slowly, calmly, and truthfully.